This is just the beginning.
Welcome to the Cryptocurrency Goes Mainstream virtual event. I'm Dan Primack, business editor of Axios, joining you from my home in Southborough, Massachusetts. Big thanks to CoinFlip for making this conversation possible on the future of cryptocurrency policy and regulation. And welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, Axios.com. If you'd like to, please join in the conversation on Twitter at Axios and with the hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague, Kia Kokalitcheva, and we'll explore investor confidence in new forms of digital currency and the shift toward a more standardized and regulated future. Our first guest is Representative Bill Foster, a congressman from Illinois and one of the co-chairs of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, joining us from his office in Washington, D.C. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Oh, happy to be here.
So, Representative Foster, let's start here. How many of your colleagues on either side of the aisle do you think really understand cryptocurrencies and the policy issues surrounding them?
Well, I sometimes feel a little bit lonely here. I'm actually Congress's only PhD physicist. I believe I'm the only integrated circuit designer, as well as the only AI and blockchain programmer, to my knowledge. Not true. My co-chair on the Science Investigations Committee is a Caltech. Representative Overnolte, my Republican colleague, has a degree from Caltech in electrical engineering and I think programs AI. But the answer to your question, very few understand the nuts and bolts of it. It's one of these issues where you don't have to understand how an engine works to drive the car to a large extent. You have to understand what is technically and not technically possible on this. And for crypto assets generally, there are two big policy questions you have to grapple with from the very start. The first thing is whether or not they will be anonymous or not, whether you will allow anonymous participation or not. This is what sort of tripped up the Facebook Libra proposal, where they were talking out of both sides of their mouth on that, where if you went and talked to the Libra Association, they said, oh, they'd be happy to have self-custody of assets, which means they're pretty anonymous. And then when you talk to Facebook, they said, no, we are going to obey all of the what are called the KYC and AML, know your customer and anti-money laundering requirements that a normal bank would. Well, both of those statements can't be true. And so
can
I
stop you there for a second? We'll get to the other policy thing, but let me ask about that. It's your opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, this idea of secure digital identity, you do believe that whether it be a court or some other government organization should be able to get the identities, even if on the so-called front end, the thing that I as a user would see or you as a front-end user would see, that would be anonymous.
Yeah, do you have to be able to go to a court to unmask participants under some circumstances? It does not have to be visible to the whole world, and that may not even be desirable. Very much like if you're some computer trading organization, you don't know who's on the other side of a trade as the bids and offerings are being settled. But you still, so they're pseudo-anonymous. The regulators can see who's doing there, and that's necessary to avoid things like wash trades and spoofing the market, things like this. And I think that sort of anonymity, the third-party anonymity, I think is going to ultimately be important here.
Do you think there is industry support for your position on that? And I guess I ask from the context of, we hear from the crypto industry all the time, we just want rules of the road, we want more regulation. But as you know, there's a pretty serious strain of crypto enthusiasts who doesn't feel that way at all, who believes real anonymity is kind of part of the key and one of the basic values of the crypto and blockchain world.
Yeah, and I think that in Congress and in the public, until they come up with an answer to the ransomware problem, I think that's going to be very hard to sustain. I have yet to see any ransomware that encrypts your drives and then says, okay, to get your encryption key back, to decrypt your drives, I want you to get $20,000 in cash, put in unmarked bills, put it in a paper bag in a trash can in Central Park. There's a fundamental difference between crypto assets and real world assets. That's an important distinction that I think we must make ultimately in the law.
You talk about the ransomware. It's interesting. I wasn't planning to go here, but I'm curious. With the Colony Pipeline ransom, which was a crypto ransomware attack from a couple months ago, the FBI or Justice Department did get most of that back. So does that suggest there actually is a solution to the ransomware problem?
I have to speak very carefully because our capabilities here are highly classified. For a long time, we have had the ability to track Bitcoin in ways that may not have been appreciated by all the bad guys out there and have taken significant advantage of it. And so now that's obviously very well known to the public. The second aspect is the conditions under which we can reclaim that, which is something that I think will become more difficult. And that really is the second fundamental decision that you have to make about crypto assets. Not only is it truly anonymous, or is there a court that you can go to unmask the participants, but also is there a trusted third party, a court that you can go to reverse fraudulent or mistaken transactions. And a simple example of that is if someone drags you into an alley, puts a gun to your head, says, "Get out your cell phone and transfer all your Bitcoin to my wallet." Are you just out of luck, or can you go to a court, have them unmask the participant, and can the court, if they decide that the transaction was fraudulent, criminal, or mistaken, that you can then have the court use its access to a very heavily guarded key, a cryptographic backdoor, in essence, that allows them to cryptographically reverse transactions on the blockchain. Now, I've just said about three things there that will drive the crypto purists berserk, like trusted third party and so on. But in fact, there's not a technological alternative that I'm aware of. And I think for most people, if they're going to have a big part of their net worth tied up in crypto assets, they're going to want to have that security blanket of a trusted third party that can solve the problem, when they get hacked, when they get stolen, or even just a mistaken assumption. There's a very nice and famous example in the old movie Paper Chase, the conditions under which a contract can be reversed. If you sign a contract that I want to rent an apartment from you in exchange for programmed Bitcoin payments every month or so, and then you go to the apartment, find it's burned down. You do not want those crypto transactions to just be mindlessly executed. You want to be able to go to a court, say, "I'm sorry, the underlying assumptions of that contract were mistaken," and then have the court reverse the results of that. And so I think
you talk about this. This is all, of course, U.S. law. You're a U.S. congressperson. So much of what happens when it comes to cryptocurrencies, even if one of the parties is in the U.S., another party is overseas, maybe. But how do you actively regulate this when so much of it is happening outside of our physical and technological borders?
Well, I think that we're going to have to establish a wall between the legal and the illegal, regimes here. That I'm not there yet, but there's a significant sentiment and increasing sentiment in Congress that if you're participating in an anonymous crypto asset transaction, that you're a de facto participant in don't worry, that's just we're coming into session here. That you are actually a de facto participant in a criminal conspiracy. And that, among other things, anyone who has to pay their ransom, say in Bitcoin, will have a private right of action to recover their losses from any holder of Bitcoin, for example. As I say, I'm not there, but I think that we're going to have to take this more seriously unless there is an answer to the problems of things like ransomware.
One of the things you personally focus a lot in Congress on, are issues of artificial intelligence. As you said, you're a PhD physicist. When we hear about AI and AI R&D in the US, one of the things we hear a lot from politicians and from some people in Silicon Valley is we need to lead on this because otherwise China is going to lead on this, and there's a national security implication to that. Does the same thing apply when it comes to blockchain technologies?
Well, the blockchain technologies have their main utility if and only if you can transact between them and the real economy. If in the end you cannot buy and hold real estate with a crypto asset, it's going to have very limited assets. And the Chinese government is I think, being more and more clear that they are not going to allow crypto assets to transit to and from their official, regulated, heavily surveilled economy. And I don't think we want to go there, but I think that there's a middle ground that we have to strive for. Somewhere between sort of the chaotic, criminal ransomware environment that we're seeing in some crypto assets, and the completely surveilled environment. And I think that common ground is third-party anonymity, where you can transact crypto assets anonymously under normal circumstances, and 99.9% of the time, the blockchain will determine who gets paid what. But in those rare instances where something fraudulent, criminal, or mistaken has happened, that you have to be able to unmask and potentially reverse those transactions. And I think that's the
question for you. Gary Gensler's new SEC chair. He has a crypto background. When he had his confirmation hearings, he said it was too early for him to answer lots of questions. It's only been a few months. Give me a quick grade, or is it an incomplete for him so far vis-a-vis crypto?
He's getting an A+ on engaging, which is something that was very hard to get the regulators to do. We don't have clarity even on which regulators in the United States will really ultimately have responsibility for this. And Gensler's doing an excellent job of making sure that we start paying attention to it and start thinking about the underlying legislation that will be needed to provide clarity.
Congressman Bill Foster, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We now turn to a special View from the Top segment with Abby Clausen, Axios Vice President of Finance and Accounting.
Hi, I'm Abby Clausen, Vice President of Finance and Accounting at Axios. Now joining us from Chicago, Illinois, CEO of CoinFlip, Ben Weiss.
Hey, Abby, thanks so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
Great, thank you for joining us. So there's a lot of talk on Capitol Hill about crypto being the wild, wild west. What do you wish lawmakers understood about cryptocurrencies?
So unfortunately, that perception persists from the early days of crypto, but the reality is it hasn't been the wild, wild west in a while. And just some quick background on CoinFlip. We operate just under 3,000 ATMs across the United States and 47 states. And the industry is getting more and more institutionalized. That's why companies like Fidelity, like Square, like eToro, they're getting into cryptocurrency. They're getting into blockchain. They see the potential with Bitcoin, but also blockchain to solve supply chain issues, health records, tracking, integrity of data. It goes beyond Bitcoin. And I think that's why it's key that the industry, that lawmakers, that we all sit down and get everyone to the table, because I think everyone wants the same thing: consumer protection, innovation. We want to keep this industry here and not overseas. And I'm confident that if we all get to the table, we can come up with a regulatory framework that achieves all of those things.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned those ATMs. What impact do you think the Bitcoin ATMs, and your company in particular, can have in transforming how people interact with crypto and the broader financial system? Why is it important that the average person be able to access crypto?
Yeah, that's a great question. And CoinFlip's ATMs, as well as some other products out there, what the industry is trying to do is to increase access, to increase inclusion, and to increase equity. Unfortunately, the legacy financial system has left some people behind, whether it's overdraft fees, middlemen, not putting branches in neighborhoods with certain populations. Bitcoin wants to grow and innovate, but it wants to do so in a more equitable way. And with the ATMs, I'll just give you a couple examples. Some people use it to send money back home to their families. A lot of the ATMs are 24/7, and they can send it directly to their families with less middlemen, so it's cheaper. And then this isn't a thing really in the US, but another thing with cryptocurrency that we don't talk about enough is the human rights aspect. In the past, if there was an authoritarian regime or a dictatorship or someone had to flee with their family, you would take every single thing you owned and you would just put it on your back or in your backpack. And what you could bring with you is what you took to start your new life. And unfortunately, people had to leave everything behind. Now with Bitcoin and blockchain, you can take, your life savings, your family's life savings with just a password in your head when you start your new life. And people don't talk about that as much as they should.
And how does Bitcoin play into the recovery from the coronavirus?
That's a great question. And the government has legitimately done a great job against all odds with helping people recover from the coronavirus. We've reimagined the social safety net. We've gotten aid to people. We've rethink about the economy and making sure we have a more equitable recovery. But unfortunately, because of some dynamics out of everyone's control with the coronavirus, we've seen the recovery disproportionately help the top, and some people at the bottom have been left out. And Bitcoin is an asset, and we've seen the recovery go to people who hold assets. So I think with Bitcoin, where people can buy $50, $100 of it, I think that's important that we're encouraging people to invest and save, even if it's in small amounts, because we want to have an equitable recovery here.
Well, it sounds like what you're doing would be really meaningful for a lot of people. Do you think the government has any role to play in regulating cryptocurrencies? And what role do you think that should be?
The government 100% has a role to play in regulating cryptocurrencies. The government has a role in protecting consumers. The government has a role in encouraging innovation and making sure that this industry is here and not overseas. Imagine if the internet developed somewhere else and not the US. And I think regulatory clarity and strong regulation, but smart regulation, actually is good for the industry. It'll give people the confidence they need to be involved with Bitcoin, to be involved with blockchain. So it's imperative that the US gets this right, because other countries are moving quick. We don't want to lose our edge. And again, I think that everyone wants the same thing in this country: to protect consumers, to have strong financial markets, to have innovation, to have jobs, to have opportunity. And I think that once people learn about Bitcoin and learn about blockchain, everyone is for it. No one is really, there might be concerns and there's things we can work through, but everyone wants innovation and they want consumer protection. So if we get everyone to the table, regulators, government officials, and we just sit down, I think we can get it done. And that's why CoinFlip, we're having these conversations and we're educating people. We're seeing what concerns they have because we want to address those. And I think there's a solution for everyone here, but we got to sit down sooner rather than later and figure this out.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the future of crypto? How long will it take for crypto to go fully mainstream? And what do you think is the biggest threat to that adoption?
So cryptocurrency has already gone mainstream. It is the best performing asset of the last 10 years by far. And it's already gone mainstream because companies like eToro, Fidelity, JP Morgan, Bank of America, they're all getting behind it now. And another thing to point out is that cryptocurrency is more than just Bitcoin. Bitcoin is what people think about because it's the most common one, but the blockchain can do a lot of things besides just Bitcoin. And the global economy, it's shifting dramatically. We're moving to a digitized economy. The physical economy is slowly transforming into the digital economy, not just in money like cryptocurrency, but with everything. And we have to make sure that no one is left behind. Bitcoin and blockchain is the easiest and most convenient way to equalize the economy. But as the industry grows, again, we have to have strong and smart regulation and regulatory clarity. The government has to make the framework so everyone knows the rules so people can innovate. Tell us the ground rules. We're more than happy to comply with them and go above and beyond them. But, we see the government as a partner in this. And I really do feel confident we can get to the right place.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights today and joining us. And thank you to CoinFlip for sponsoring today's event.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a super important event, and we hope to have more and more of these.
Absolutely. And now to my colleague, Kia Kokalitcheva.
Thanks, Abby. And I'm Kia Kokalitcheva, a tech and business reporter with Axios. And today, for a final guest, we have Michael Sonnenshein, who's the CEO of Grayscale Investment, and he's joining us from New York in New York. Welcome to Axios, Michael.
Hello, great to be here.
Welcome. Well, first of all, can you give us like a very, 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 very quick overview of what Grayscale does? So I think that's kind of important to set the conversation today.
So Grayscale is the world's largest digital currency asset management business, dating back to 2013. Today, we manage a family of 14 different investment products, each of which is solely and passively invested in digital currencies. I think our business model is really predicated on the idea that crypto comes with some challenges in terms of where to buy it, how to transfer it, how to store it, and how to safekeep it. And so we've designed a whole family of investment products that allow investors to get exposure and get access to digital currencies, but in the form of a security. So that's our business, and manage about $35 billion today across that family of 14 products.
Right. So since we're talking about regulation today, from where you sit, you're probably spending a lot of your time talking to a lot of institutional investors of all kinds. So what are some of the apprehensions that they still have today? I mean, we're over a decade into Bitcoin's existence. And what are especially the regulatory concerns that they still express to you in your conversations with them?
Well, I think a lot of the investors that are involved in the ecosystem today are approaching it with probably as informed a perspective as we've ever seen. I think that historically we've seen apprehension around things like, is Bitcoin or our digital currencies going to be here to stay? What are their actual use cases? Isn't this used for illicit activity? Is there maybe not enough regulatory clarity for us to get involved? We've really graduated beyond a lot of those types of notions and really started to see that institutions now recognize, number one, the staying power of the asset class for sure, but two, that the asset class has developed enough institutional quality tools for them to access it, whether that's through Grayscale products, derivatives, or really just seeing how healthy a two-sided market we now have around crypto. They've seen quite a bit of regulatory clarity provided, certainly here in the US. Regulators from the SEC, the CFTC, Treasury, FinCEN, you name it, that I think now investors have the comfort to participate. And what's really accelerated a lot of that participation is now that they're also seeing some of the world's most famous and most experienced investors publicly getting in support of digital currencies, some public companies adding Bitcoin and other crypto to their balance sheet, and ultimately recognizing that digital currencies offer a risk-reward opportunity that they'd be pretty hard-pressed to find looking at other asset classes.
So is there really nothing that they're asking you about? I mean, we had the whole debacle with the last minute, unhosted wallet stuff come out of nowhere and throw everyone up. Like, there's nothing that institutional investors are like, but Michael, what about this?
I think investors are coming to the table with questions around specific digital currencies or protocols. They're looking at how certain upgrades to some of these networks may affect their investment, what some of the use cases may be, where the development work is taking place. These are really much, much deeper, much more informed conversations we're having around specific protocols, because I do think, Kia, one of the big takeaways that we've seen over the last 18 months is certainly a trend toward diversification. If you'd asked or had this conversation with me about 18 months ago or maybe 2 years ago, every investor's first foray into this asset class was Bitcoin. And it's not to say now that investors aren't still investing in Bitcoin. They certainly are. But there's certainly been a trend towards thinking about a world in which multiple digital currencies coexist. They each have different use cases, different addressable markets. And I think a lot of investors appreciate that a diversified crypto portfolio is actually something that really warrants their attention and deployment of capital.
Mm-hmm. You guys actually announced recently that you're considering, I think, 13 new tokens, a lot of them in DeFi, which is decentralized finance. What does that tell us about how you're feeling about the regulatory regime now? I mean, it feels like we have Gary Gensler at the SEC now, who is deeply knowledgeable about crypto and how it works, and deeply in the law as well. But at the same time, just last week, we saw another enforcement action from the SEC from an old initial coin offering. And so how much is there certainty around new protocols and new tokens, and how much is still very much uncertain and really up to what regulators come up with?
Well, I think Grayscale is a business that's a really good example of one that is operating entirely within the digital currency realm, but is doing so through existing regulatory frameworks. And so we are heavily engaged with all of the regulatory bodies in DC. The asset class is moving very, very quickly. And so we can only imagine how difficult it may be from a regulator's perspective to keep up with how fast things are changing. I think one of the important things that we try to do at Grayscale is to really ensure that we're being as transparent as possible with the market, with our investors and our partners. And so, to your point, we have and will continue to publish a list of various assets that we as an organization are exploring. It's very much worth noting that not every asset that is on that exploration list will make its way into a Grayscale product. The types of analyses that we're doing not only span regulatory analysis on certain protocols, but also governance and supply and development and use cases and where the market is for these assets, how price discovery functions, are there sound custodial solutions? It's a very in-depth analysis that's both qualitative and quantitative, but certainly happy to also share that the 14 products that Grayscale manages today will not be the end of our product development cycle. So we'll continue to work, both as a team as well as with regulators to, keep bringing products to market and keep up with investor demand.
On a related note, the Bitcoin ETF, which is something that's been elusive, several institutions have, attempted to get authorization from the SEC for one. Why is that so sought after to make it happen? And do you think we're anywhere close to finally getting approval for one? I mean, so far the SEC has pretty much rejected or sort of kicked the can a little bit on all the ones that we've seen.
Well, this is very near and dear to, certainly for me at Grayscale and our entire team. We've been working on a Bitcoin ETF since 2016 with the SEC and ultimately pulled out of that process in 2017, just realizing regulators weren't yet ready for it. Despite that, though, we are just as committed as we've ever been to converting our flagship product, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, GBTC, into an ETF, and are constantly working with the SEC and other regulators to give them increased comfort with this ecosystem. I think that the important takeaway for investors is that the absence of an ETF is certainly not holding investors back from participating in Bitcoin. Investors are certainly utilizing GBTC every day to be involved in Bitcoin in their portfolios. They're accessing Bitcoin directly. And there certainly will be another group that perhaps is a smaller group that is sitting on the sidelines waiting for an ETF before they'll either access crypto or before an FA or other fiduciary may recommend getting involved in Bitcoin. And from our view of the world, we're certainly seeing maturity developing in the market, but perhaps we haven't reached a level yet that is giving regulators the comfort they need to approve an ETF. And so they're very focused on investor protection, seeing the same types of surveillance sharing agreements in place amongst crypto exchanges that they may see amongst equity exchanges, and also just seeing a robust, regulated market. And so as time goes on, we are very confident that a Bitcoin ETF will be a matter of when and not a matter of if. And certainly at Grayscale, this is something we're very focused on and committed to doing.
Do you think there's a particular sticking point or hurdle that we need to get over to get there?
Well, I do think the spot market for crypto and Bitcoin specifically is one of those important points. There are, to my point about surveillance sharing between NASDAQ and NYSE, for example, if we were able to have that same level of oversight over the spot markets, I think those are the types of points of maturity that regulators need to get increasingly comfortable to have an ETF be tied to the underlying asset and not have any kind of manipulation associated with it.
Well, let's just hope that, from your lips to the regulators' ears. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. This is a great conversation.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. And thank you to our sponsor, CoinFlip, for making this event possible. For more info or to sign up for Axios Parata, visit axios.com/newsletters or on the Axios app. Also join us on Twitter right now for a conversation about the latest business trends affecting the workplace and transportation, featuring Axios Markets editor Sam Rowe, Axios business reporter Erica Pandy, and Axios transportation correspondent Joanne Muller. And lastly, join us tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern for an Axios special coverage event on the state of LGBTQ rights, unpacking the stark increase in anti-trans bills across the country. You can tune in anywhere you watch Axios events. And thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on Axios.com.